drafting the cold open as a pure voiceover piece, aiming for around 6,500 characters in the specified voice and English language. Look at the water first, not at the girl. The girl comes later, and so does the argument, and so does the confession that will not quite hold together. Look at the water. It is a shallow Yorkshire beck in the last summer of the Great War, a thread of brown current sliding over flat stones behind a row of cottages in the village of Cottingley, and along the near bank the grass has been beaten down where children have knelt. It is late in the afternoon. The light is low, and it comes in almost level, the way light does in the north of England in July, catching the tops of the ferns and turning the running water into 100 small mirrors. And there, at the very edge of the frame, poised on the leaves above the stream, is the thing you came to see. It is small. That is the first fact, and it is a fact that has never gone away. It is small in a way that photography in 1917 could not easily fake and could not easily explain. A figure perhaps the length of a hand, standing upright on a spray of foliage that does not bend beneath it. It has the shape of a young woman, and it does not have the shape of a young woman. The limbs are too fine, the waist too narrow, the whole body drawn with a delicacy that reads, to the eye, as weightless. It wears a pale gown that catches the light along its edge. Its hair is loose. Its arms are lifted, one higher than the other, in the exact attitude of something arrested in the middle of a movement, as though the shutter had opened on a single frozen instant of a dance that was already underway before anyone thought to look. And it has wings, not stiff, not folded, not the flat-pinned wings of a specimen in a case. They rise from its shoulders and spread out behind it, broad and translucent, veined like the wing of a dragonfly or the petal of some flower that does not grow in Yorkshire, and they are lit from behind so that the light passes through them and softens their edges into the ferns. They are the part your eye returns to. Because a cutout, a drawing, a paper shape propped in the grass, that we can imagine. But the wings in the picture do not sit flat against the plane of a printed figure. They seem to occupy space. They seem to have caught the same slanting sun that lit the water, and the figure is looking back. That is the detail that undoes people. It is not staring at the camera, and it is not staring away. It is turned slightly, its face angled over the leaves toward the girl who is kneeling out of frame in most versions of the story, and half in frame in others, a 16-year-old named Elsie Wright and her 10-year-old cousin Frances Griffiths, one of whom is holding the camera and one of whom will spend the rest of her life saying that the thing was alive. The figure looks the way a wild animal looks when it has noticed you and has not yet decided to flee. Aware, present, caught in the act of being seen. And it is that quality, not the wings, not the gown, but the sense that the thing knows it is being watched, that lifts the picture out of the category of a pretty forgery and into something that has refused, for more than a century, to lie down and be ordinary. I want to be exact about what is in that first plate, because everything that follows depends on it, and because almost everyone who talks about Cottingley has never looked at it slowly. It is a quarter-plate photograph, taken on a borrowed camera, developed in a cellar. In the foreground, sharp and unmistakable, is the face of a real child, Frances, her chin resting on her hand, her eyes not on the fairies at all, but level and calm, looking directly out of 1917 and into whatever room you are sitting in now. And in front of her, between her face and the lens, close enough that the focus holds them both, are the figures, 4 of them in the most famous frame, dancing in a row along the top of the bank, and a 5th thing that is not dancing. Hold on that contrast. A living girl, unremarkable, a little bored, entirely of this world. And 40 centimetres in front of her nose, a ring of winged women the size of sparrows, mid-leap, mid-turn, one of them playing what looks like a set of pipes, and none of them, this is the thing that stops the breath, none of them blurred. Frances is still because she was told to be still. The fairies are still because the camera froze them. But nothing that fine, nothing with wings that thin, holds so perfectly sharp unless it is either pinned in place or moving in a way we have not accounted for. The photograph gives you both readings at once and lets you choose, and for 100 years people have chosen, and the choice has never settled. I have spent a long time inside this material now, longer than the subject probably deserves, and I will tell you plainly where I stand before we go a single step further, because I do not want you to think I am about to sell you fairies. I am not. Almost all of what you are going to see in this story has an explanation, and the explanation is human, and by the end I will lay it out for you as honestly as I know how, in the words of the people who finally admitted what they did. 5 of these photographs have a confession attached to them. 5 of them can be explained. It is the 6th that I cannot put down, but we are not there yet. Right now it is 1917. The war is grinding through its 3rd year. The telegrams from France are arriving in villages like this one every week, and 2 girls have gone down to the beck at the bottom of the garden with a plate camera they were not really trusted to use, and they have come back up the path with an image on glass that will, within 3 years, reach the most famous author in the English-speaking world, that will be published to a readership of hundreds of thousands, that will make a nation of grieving, rational, grown men and women want, badly, to believe that the dead were not gone, and the world was not only what it appeared to be. That is where this is going. That is the machine we are about to watch start up. But before the letters, before Conan Doyle, before the experts and the microscopes and the 70 years of denial and the deathbed half-retraction, before any of that, there is only this. A brown stream, a bored child, low July light on running water, and poised at the edge of it, wings open, face turned, looking back at the girl who swore until she was an old woman that it had looked back at her too. Let me show you how they said they found it. I'm working on the middle section now, tracing how the photographs came to light through Elsie and Francis in Cottingley Glen, the camera they borrowed, the 5 plates they produced, and how Conan Doyle became captivated by them, setting off a chain of letters and expert examinations that would grip the nation's attention. The house was called Cottingley, and it sat in the West Riding of Yorkshire, in a village of the same name near Bingley, a place of blackened stone and mill smoke and steep gardens that ran down to water. In it lived the Wright family, and in the summer of 1917 they had a houseguest. Frances Griffiths was 9 years old. She had come from South Africa with her mother while her father was away at the war, and she had been folded into the household of her aunt and uncle, Polly and Arthur Wright, and their daughter Elsie. Elsie was 16. That gap of 7 years matters, and I want you to hold it, because almost everything that follows turns on the difference between what a 9-year-old will say and what a 16-year-old can do. At the bottom of the Wrights' garden ran a beck, a narrow Yorkshire stream, cold and brown, cutting through a wooded glen thick with foxglove and fern, and the low, tangled light that comes off moving water in July. The 2 girls went down there constantly, over stepping stones, along the muddy bank, and they came home with wet shoes and wet stockings, and they were scolded for it, again and again. And their explanation, when it was pressed out of them, was the sentence that started the whole affair. They went down to the beck, they said, to see the fairies. That was the excuse. Nobody believed it. Nobody was meant to, at first. But Elsie's father, Arthur Wright, was an amateur photographer with a darkroom in the house and a Midge quarter-plate camera, a boxy folding thing that took a single glass plate at a time, a serious instrument for a serious hobby, not a toy. And in the July of 1917, Elsie asked to borrow it. She wanted, she said, to prove the fairies were real. Arthur loaded a single plate for her, 1 exposure. He showed her how to hold it, how to trip the shutter, and the 2 girls went down the path to the beck and were gone perhaps half an hour. When they came back, Elsie handed the camera to her father, and he took it into the darkroom to develop the plate himself. And this is the moment. I want to be precise about it. This is the moment the thing first appeared on glass, in a chemical tray, in a red-lit room in a mill village, watched by a skeptical man who expected to see nothing. What came up in the developer was Frances. She is standing behind a bank of foliage, chin on her hand, a 9-year-old with a straight fringe, and an expression that is not wonder and not fear, but something flatter and stranger than either. She looks bored. She looks like a child made to sit still. And in front of her, between her face and the camera, sharp and sunlit and mid-motion, are 4 small winged figures, dancing. One of them appears to be playing a long pipe. They have gauzy wings and drawn faces and elaborate hair, and they are lit from a different angle than the girl behind them, and they are in perfect focus while the water and the leaves fall soft, and they are, unmistakably, the shape of a thing that should not be in a photograph of a Yorkshire stream. Arthur Wright thought it was rubbish. I want that on the record too. The man closest to it, the man who developed it with his own hands, took one look and decided his daughter had propped up cardboard, and he refused to lend the camera again for months. He was, we now know, exactly right. But being right did him no good at all, because the plate had already left the darkroom, and the only thing that ever really matters with an image like this is not whether it is true. It is who wants it to be. A second plate followed that September dawn, Elsie this time, seated on the grass, and a single winged gnome-like figure stepping toward her outstretched hand. 2 plates now. 2 impossible photographs in one household, and there they might have stayed, family curiosities, a joke among the Wrights, had the girls' mothers not carried the story out of the house. Polly Wright had become interested in theosophy, in the spiritual currents running strong through a country buried in its war dead, and in the summer of 1919 she took the prince to a meeting of the Theosophical Society in Bradford, where talk turned to nature spirits, and she said quietly that her daughter had photographed some. From that room, the images began to travel. Prints were made, lantern slides struck, and by 1920 they had reached Edward Gardner, a leading theosophical lecturer, and through him, and this is where the small domestic hoax becomes a national event, they reached Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes, the most rational fictional mind ever put on a page, invented by a man who by 1920 had lost his son to the war and its aftermath, and had given himself wholly to spiritualism, to the conviction that the dead endured and the unseen world was real and could at last be proved. Doyle had been commissioned to write an article on fairies for the Strand magazine, the same publication that had made Holmes famous, for its Christmas issue. And into his hands came 2 photographs from Yorkshire that seemed to hand him his proof already developed. He did not simply believe them. He tested them, or he had them tested, and this is the part the confession later has to reckon with. The prince went to Kodak, whose experts declined to certify them genuine but conceded they showed no obvious sign of being faked. They went to the firm Illingworth. They went to Gardner's own contacts. The reports came back cautious, hedged, unwilling to call them real and unable to call them fraudulent, which, to a man who wanted to believe, read as permission. Doyle wanted more plates. Through Gardner, he arranged for the girls to be given a better camera and fresh sealed plates in the summer of 1920, quietly marked so no one could switch them, and Frances and Elsie were sent back down to the beck to try again. 3 more images came up out of that. Another fairy offering flowers, a leaping figure, and the last one, the strange one, the one this whole film is bending toward. The 5th plate, taken alone, that Elsie and Frances would each describe separately for the rest of their lives as the one they did not stage. 5 photographs in total now stood in the record. Conan Doyle took them, and in the December 1920 Strand, over his own famous name, he published the Cottingley Fairies to a readership of hundreds of thousands as very likely genuine. Now I'm moving into the final section, the payoff of the whole narrative. I need to trace how the photograph haunted the finders and shaped the historical record, then follow the arc through decades of mounting pressure, the eventual confessions in the 1980s where they revealed the paper cutouts, and land on that one stubborn detail neither woman ever backed away from, the 5th plate that remained unexplained. The issue sold out. It was reprinted within days, and whatever Doyle imagined he had done for the cause of spiritualism, what he had actually done was fasten 2 working-class girls from a mill town to a story they could never again set down. Frances was 13, Elsie was 19. Neither had asked to become evidence. Neither had signed on to be examined, quoted, doubted, defended in the pages of a national magazine over the signature of the most famous author in the English-speaking world. But that is what happened to them. The figure at the water's edge had reached out of the frame and taken hold of their whole lives, and it did not let go for 60 years. Consider what that meant, practically, in the decades that followed. Every time the subject surfaced, and it surfaced again and again, in the 20s, the 30s, after the war, into the 60s, someone came looking for them. Journalists. Believers wanting confirmation, skeptics wanting a crack. Elsie married, went to India, came home, grew old. Francis married a soldier, moved abroad, raised a family, and still the question followed them across continents and across half a century. Were the fairies real? They had told a story as children, a small story between a girl and her cousin down by a stream, and the adult world had inflated it into something monstrous and permanent, and now they could neither confirm it without lying, nor deny it without calling Arthur Conan Doyle a fool in public and admitting they had deceived their own families. So they did the thing people do when the truth is too expensive. They said as little as possible. They deflected. They let it lie. It held for a very long time. It held until they were old women, until Doyle was long dead, until the men who had staked their reputations on the plates were beyond embarrassment. And then, in the late 1970s and into the early 80s, under the patient questioning of researchers who had gone back to the original material, Geoffrey Crawley, in the British Journal of Photography, over a series of articles across 1982 and 1983, and later Joe Cooper, the thing finally came apart. Elsie admitted it first, obliquely, then plainly. Francis followed. In an interview published in 1983, they confessed what a certain kind of viewer had suspected from the beginning, and what a great many people had refused to believe for 66 years. The fairies were cutouts, paper figures, drawn by Elsie, who had a real gift for illustration and had worked briefly in a photographer's studio and knew a little of how images were made. She had copied the poses, she admitted, in part from a popular children's book of the period, Princess Mary's Gift Book, adapting the dancing figures in it. They had cut the shapes out, sharpened them, and propped them upright in the grass with hatpins. Hatpins. The most photographed supernatural evidence of the 20th century had been held up by hatpins the whole time. You would think that would be the end of it. A clean confession, a solved case, the file closed. And for most of the plates, it is. 4 of the 5, by both women's own account, were staged exactly that way. Cut, drawn, pinned, photographed, developed, and sent up into a nation's hunger for proof. I have read the confessions closely. I find them credible. They are detailed, they are consistent with the physical evidence, they are given without much drama by 2 elderly women who had nothing left to gain and every reason, finally, to set the record straight. If the story ended there, it would be an ordinary and rather sad account of a childish prank that outgrew its makers. But it does not end there. Because at the very moment they were confessing to everything else, both women stopped. On one plate, the 5th, the last one, the strange one taken in 1920 with the sealed and secretly marked plates, the one that shows no clear figure at all, but a curious veil of shapes in the grass, sometimes called the fairy bower or the sun bath. They would not go the whole way. Elsie called it genuine. Francis was more insistent still. To the end of her life she maintained that the 5th photograph was real, that it had not been staged, that there was nothing cut out and pinned in it, that whatever registered on that plate had been there in the glen. She said it in the 1983 interview. She said it in her memoir, published after her death. She said it, in effect, with her final breath. Francis Griffiths died in 1986. Elsie Wright died in 1988. And each of them, having surrendered the entire edifice, having handed over the hatpins and the drawings and the borrowed poses, kept back this one plate and carried it out of the world with them. Think about the psychology of that for a moment, because it is the hinge on which this whole story turns. A liar who is finally caught, finally exhausted, finally old, tends to let go of everything at once. There is relief in it. Confession, once begun, wants to be total. It costs a person nothing extra to admit to the fifth fake once they have admitted to the first four. Indeed, it is stranger, harder, more effortful to draw a line in the middle of a confession and defend one lonely image as true while conceding all the rest were false. It wins them nothing. It makes them look inconsistent. It invites exactly the scrutiny they had spent 60 years trying to escape. And yet, that is precisely what both of them did, independently, without coordinating their stories, one in Yorkshire and one in the Midlands, both firm on the same single plate. What, then, is on it? The fifth plate does not show a poised winged figure looking back at the camera. It shows something looser and harder to name, a suggestion of small forms nested in the grass and the shadow, an impression of movement, a smear of the same subject seen, as it were, mid-transition, as though the camera had caught not a propped cutout, but something that would not hold still to be photographed. The staged plates are crisp because paper does not move. This one is not crisp in that way. There is a blurring, a doubling, that the cutout and hatpin method cannot easily produce, because a pinned paper figure standing in still summer air produces a sharp edge, not a movement, and it was taken, remember, on a plate that had been marked in advance so it could not be swapped, taken when the girls, by their own later account, were alone and no longer even bothering to fake anything, because the visit had been unproductive and they were tired of the whole performance. So we are left with a photograph that its own creators refused to explain, and a physical object that, by every ordinary rule of evidence, should have settled the matter one way or the other. It did not. And the reason it did not is the quiet, unglamorous truth at the centre of every vanished thing I have ever chased. You cannot examine what no longer exists in a form that can be examined. Consider what happened to the plates themselves. The original glass negatives, the actual light-sensitive surfaces struck by whatever stood at the edge of that beck in 1917, did not remain in careful hands. They passed through the household of Edward Gardner, through the offices of the Theosophical Society, through borrowings and copyings and rephotographings, each generation of reproduction a little further from the source. When Geoffrey Crawley conducted his long, patient investigation for the British Journal of Photography across the winter of 1982 and 1983, the most thorough technical study the case ever received, he was already working, in large part, with prints and copy negatives rather than the pristine originals. The first-generation glass, the thing you would actually want under a microscope, had thinned out of the record. Some plates survive today, held now in the collections associated with the National Science and Media Museum in Bradford and in private hands, and you can go and look at their catalogue entries. But the chain of custody that a forensic examiner would demand, this exact plate, untouched from camera to lab, was broken decades ago, casually, by ordinary people who had no idea they were destroying the only evidence that would ever matter. And the fifth plate is the worst case of all. The one image that resists the confession is also the one least well preserved, least often reproduced in high fidelity, most degraded by the emulsion sickness that eats old glass, the silvering, the fogging, the slow chemical death of a 100-year-old negative left in the wrong temperature and the wrong light. So the very frame you would most want to enlarge, to measure grain by grain, to test for the telltale sharp edge of paper against the soft doubling of something that moved, is the frame that has decayed the furthest. That is not a conspiracy. Nobody hid it. Nobody burned it. It simply was not protected, because the people who held it did not understand, or did not want to understand, that it was the only one that could not be dismissed. Then the witnesses died. Francis Griffiths in 1986, Elsie Wright in 1988, both of them having spent their last years saying the same careful, maddening thing, yes to the cutouts, yes to the hatpins, yes to the whole embarrassing charade of 4 staged plates, and then that flat refusal on the 5th. Francis, to the end, insisted the 5th was genuine, and that they really had seen fairies in the glen. Elsie was more guarded, more willing to let it all dissolve into ambiguity, but she never crossed the line either. And when they were gone, the last living access to what actually happened on that plate went with them. You can no longer ask. You can only read the transcripts, watch the old television interviews, and notice how two elderly women, given every opportunity and every incentive to close the book cleanly, both declined. Now let me give the skeptics their due, because they deserve it, and because I have spent long enough with this material to feel the pull of the simplest answer. The strongest ordinary explanation of the fifth plate is not that fairies moved through the grass. It is that the plate is a technical accident, a double exposure. In the fumbling, amateur handling of glass plates by two girls with a borrowed camera, it is entirely possible for a plate to be exposed twice, once faintly with a partial image, and again over the top, producing exactly the doubling and blurring and ghostly smearing that we see. A second cutout, half lifted, half fallen, caught in two positions across two accidental exposures, would give you a soft, moving, unpaper-like impression that no single pinned figure ever could. Crawley himself leaned towards something like this, that the fifth was botched rather than supernatural, a failed fake or a spoiled plate rather than a window onto the impossible. I find this persuasive. It requires no new physics, no unknown creature, no suspension of everything we know. It fits the girls' own admission that the day had been unproductive, and they were tired. A ruined plate is exactly what tired, careless photography produces. And yet, if the fifth plate were simply a spoiled double exposure, a plain photographic error, why would the two of them build it into the one hill they were willing to die on? A double exposure is not a thing you protect. It is not a thing you go to your grave defending. You would let it go with all the rest, gratefully, because it costs you nothing. Instead, they drew that line, both of them, separately, and held it for the remainder of their lives against every interviewer who pressed them. The spoiled plate theory explains the marks on the emulsion. It does not explain the behavior of the two people who made it, and behavior, in the end, is the only witness left that has not decayed. So go back with me, one last time, to the summer of 1917, to the wet green cut of Cottingley Glen and the beck running low over its stones. A girl kneels at the water's edge with a heavy camera she barely knows how to work. In front of her, close enough to touch, something small stands poised in the light, sharp, mid-motion, turned as if it has just become aware of being seen. On 4 occasions we now know what that shape was. It was paper and pins and the clever hands of 2 bored children who fooled a knight of the realm and a grieving, hopeful nation. That much is settled. That much they confessed. But there is a 5th frame. On the 5th frame the figure will not hold still, will not resolve into a clean paper edge, and both of the only people who ever stood on that bank refused, to their last breath, to call it a lie. The plate is decaying now in a museum drawer. The girls are gone. Conan Doyle is gone. Everyone who could tell us is gone. And the small blurred thing in the grass, the one shape in the whole affair that the confession never reached, is still there in the emulsion, still moving, still looking back. What was standing at the edge of the water? We will not know now, and perhaps that is the only honest place to leave it, not with an answer, but with the question the girls themselves would never quite let anyone take away.